This is not a story about Romeo and Juliet. Have you ever noticed how many worthy, talented, and magnanimous individuals pass away young? Some people, barely crossing into their 20s or 30s, leave this life suddenly. It often seems like there were no signs of impending trouble. They lived, worked, and planned for the future, just like everyone else. However, misfortune, illness, or criminal acts disrupt the usual order, and so those who once showed great promise and were intelligent and determined are now gone. In an attempt to find solace, or due to helplessness in the face of the situation, it's often said that the heavens take the best. This same tragedy struck Jamie and Lilie James. None of them could have imagined the horrific ordeal that was to come, to bury their beloved daughter. Unexpected news. On October 26, 2023, around 4:30 a.m., the principal of St. Andrew's Cathedral School, located in central Sydney, sent out an email to all students' parents. It stated that the school would be closed until the end of the week due to a critical incident. 2 hours later, worried families received another notification. The administration assured that none of the students were involved. However, the news was unsettling, especially since it was later clarified that this directive did not apply to graduating students taking exams. For those distressed by the situation, psychological support was made available. Soon, a round-the-clock consultation center was set up in the school library. On Thursday and Friday, the school building and surrounding area were thoroughly searched by forensic teams. Access to the gym was restricted, and the adjacent shower area was slated for demolition soon. So what terrible event had occurred within the school walls? A corpse in the shower. Around midnight on October 25, 2023, the body of a 20-year-old woman was found. She had last been seen alive at 7 p.m. The water polo coach had entered the gym's shower and never came out. Surveillance cameras recorded someone following her. Around 8 p.m., the pursuer left alone and headed towards the school exit. The woman's parents were the first to raise an alarm about her disappearance. Lilie had been uncontactable all day, and at 10 p.m., she sent a message asking to be picked up from work. Fortunately, the police, already informed about the situation, took care of it instead. The night guard, making his rounds, witnessed a horrific scene. A woman lay in a pool of blood on the floor with a shattered head. After recovering from the initial shock, he called emergency services. Later, detectives invited a family friend for body identification. The woman's face was so disfigured that it was hard to recognize the once beloved Miss James. After the news of her death reached the public, her home was filled with people. Friends, neighbors, and acquaintances came to support her grieving family. Local residents also expressed their sorrow and respect for the prematurely departed, continuously bringing flowers and toys, turning the area around the house into a memorial. Yet this mysterious death was not the only intrigue in this case. Another tragic loss. On October 27th at 8 a.m., just 11 miles from the scene of the first crime, the remains of a man were discovered. This grim find was made by vendors working nearby. The body was located on the rocks of Diamond Bay Reserve, close to Vaucluse, an eastern suburb of Sydney. After a call to the police, a rescue team was promptly assembled. The operation included a bomb squad, Marine Corps, and a rescue helicopter. At 3:30 p.m., the man's body was retrieved and taken to forensic experts for identification. Due to the injuries sustained from a high fall, visual inspection was not possible, so fingerprints were used for this purpose. At that time, experts suspected the identity of the man. However, confirmation was needed for certainty. Eventually, the man was identified as 24-year-old Mr Thijssen, who was suspected in the crime against Lilie James. Investigators had a challenging task ahead: to draw parallels between the two fatal incidents and to uncover what had happened between these individuals a few days earlier. A diamond among the stones, Lilie was born in the last spring month of 2002 in the coastal town of Sanssouci, New South Wales, Australia. She was the first and cherished child of the close-knit James family. She was especially adored by Barbara, her maternal grandmother. Lilie spent her childhood with her younger brother Max by the ocean. She was very active and enduring, with a passion for swimming. Her father, who coached the water polo team at an Anglican girls' school in Hurstville, supported his daughter's interest. Friends recalled that she was sociable and friendly, excelled in her studies, and helped those who were struggling. These qualities endeared her to many, ensuring she was never alone. In her upper school years, thanks to her achievements in academics, sports, and community life, she was recognized as one of the best students. Whatever she took on, she succeeded in. Her incredible talent to excel in all areas of activity was undeniable. She also had an interest in the dramatic arts, which led her to participate in the theater and dance club. Over time, the talented young woman was noticed and invited to participate in the famous Woodford Folk Festival, one of Australia's largest annual events, attended by around 125,000 people, including local, national, and international guests. The event usually takes place from December 27th to January 1st, marking the New Year's celebration. With a broad selection of genres and styles like circus, cabaret, comedy, street performances, workshops, debates, and more, Lilie chose to perform a unique rendition of a monologue from William Shakespeare's Macbeth. During the performance, her skills, natural charisma, and allure were fully displayed. Receiving unprecedented applause and approval from the jury, she secured second place in the theater category. This was a true success and a great boost, as our heroine not only gained recognition, but also a significant monetary prize. In 2018, the young Miss James added another achievement to her collection. She passed her beginner's driving test. Her athletic successes deserve special mention, too. Following in her father's footsteps, she began to pursue water polo professionally. The athlete earned the title of swimming champion in the under-17 category. Understandably, her parents were thrilled with their daughter's successes and celebrated each accomplishment grandly. By her senior year, Lilie had definitively decided on her future life, focusing on a sports career. Thus, in 2020, she enrolled at Sydney Technological University to pursue a bachelor's degree in sports business management. A fateful encounter. At the beginning of 2021, a new chapter began in our heroine's life. To spice up her college routine and gain teaching experience, she took a job as a water polo coach at St. Andrew's Cathedral School. Thanks to her youth, vibrant personality, and love for sports, she quickly connected not only with her colleagues in administration, but also with the group she was entrusted with. The students were drawn to her, striving to match her standards. In turn, she tried to find a unique approach to each student and highlight something special. It was during this time that Lilie met the new cricket and hockey coach, Mr Thijssen. With his professional skills and striking appearance, he quickly caught the attention of those around him. The ambitious young man, in addition to his main job, also taught part-time at another educational institution and was a member of the University of New South Wales hockey team. Paul was undoubtedly popular, especially among female audiences. However, opinions about him were mixed. Some described him as proud and headstrong, while others noted his positive traits. Initially, the interaction between Lilie and Paul was friendly and limited to mutual greetings. However, it later developed into something more. Lilie's friends shared that one day the young man asked her out on a date. Given Paul's dazzling smile, it was hard for her to resist, and she agreed. The date made a strong impression on both, and they decided to meet again. Unaware of whom she was becoming involved with, Lilie, due to her own kindness and openness, fell in love. It seemed that Paul reciprocated her feelings. He showered her with compliments, gave her flowers, and organized evenings together. At that moment, the young couple agreed that no one at the school, especially the students, should know about their warm relationship. This was a requirement of the school's policy and Lilie's personal beliefs. She never wanted her personal life to be public. Therefore, at work, the couple was cautious. However, over time, rumors began to spread. Initially, timid whispers turned into a full-blown public discussion. When Lilie found out who had disclosed their relationship, she was deeply disappointed. It turned out that Paul had broken their agreement. Moreover, the way he portrayed his companion led to condemnation towards the young employee. She felt betrayed and humiliated, so she confronted her boyfriend about everything she thought of him and ended the relationship. Later, it was learned that Paul tried to reconcile and repeatedly asked for forgiveness, but Lilie was resolute. The only consolation for her was that their relationship was short-lived. During that time, she had seen his true character. Fortune's favorite Paul was born in 1999 in the Netherlands. The Thijssens moved to Australia in 2015 when the family head was transferred to a new position. It must be said that his parents were affluent and well-known within certain circles. As an only child, Paul received ample attention and care from his family, which certainly shaped his character. He grew up spoiled and self-centered. The younger Thijssen knew his worth, excelled academically, and was active in sports. His impressive physical fitness was immediately noticeable. After relocating, Paul enrolled at St. Andrew's Cathedral School, where he joined the cricket team. He achieved great success, earning recognition and respect from his peers. Over time, he was appointed team captain. He also actively participated in extracurricular activities and festivals, helping with their organization. That's when opinions about him began to diverge. Some boys disliked their overly confident peer who claimed he could win over any girl's heart. However, the ladies found the young man charming and personable. After graduating in 2017, the school administration offered him the opportunity to stay on as an assistant coach for cricket and hockey. He gladly accepted the offer. By early 2018, he had taken over managing these sections. It must be said that he felt confident in his workplace and successfully assumed a leadership position. Eventually, Paul resigned and returned home with his family. The reason for his sudden departure remains unknown. Back home, he decided to continue his education and earned a master's degree in sports management. In a conversation with old friends, he mentioned that he had improved his coaching skills, which soon led to a lucrative offer from his former employer. In early 2020, the doors of the familiar school reopened for him. Upon returning to Australia, Paul met a former friend who suggested they share housing expenses. The young man agreed, finding shared living more enjoyable, even though he could afford to rent alone economically. The rented apartment was located in Kensington, an eastern suburb of Sydney. Initially, the friends got along well, relaxing together at bars after work. However, a few months later, a conflict arose. The fiery Paul decided to live alone. The Thijssens confessed that despite being busy and constantly surrounded by people, their son felt lonely. They knew nothing of any romantic relationships, though they suspected he had not experienced serious love interests. In March 2020, an unexpected event occurred both nationally and globally. Due to a coronavirus outbreak, Australia declared an emergency and imposed strict quarantine measures. For 18 months, Paul was left to his own devices, unable to leave the country to see his family due to infection risks. The massive restrictions affected all areas of life, leaving Paul to fend for himself. By the summer of 2021, life had returned to normal. However, it turned out that isolation had impacted interpersonal relationships. When Paul resumed his previous duties, some began to notice changes in his character and behavior. He soon returned to the sports world and became a key player on the hockey team, continuing to lead an active lifestyle, even appearing in match advertisements. At the same time, acquaintances noted characteristics not previously seen in him, such as uncontrollable outbursts of anger. Additionally, rumors spread at the school that he had a particular interest in his female students. The young coach repeatedly flirted with teenage girls, often watching them for extended periods, causing them to blush and feel awkward. Nevertheless, Thijssen continued to be regarded as a significant figure. His performance had a substantial impact on the team's progression to the finals of the Australian Hockey League. Imagine the blow to his ego when Lilie ended their relationship. Following Paul's trail. When investigators began probing the case, there was no doubt about Paul's involvement. After the discovery of a woman's body, they quickly got on the trail of the culprit. Surveillance cameras, both inside and outside, played a significant role in this. The young man carelessly appeared on them. Several inquiries were also made to Lilie and Paul's cell service provider. The police needed to determine his last known location, so they decided to track the suspect via GPS. They also wanted to find the victim's phone, hoping that the messages it contained could shed light on what had happened. After some time, the locations of the devices were established. Furthermore, by reconstructing the sequence of events, it was discovered that Paul had bought a hammer at a hardware store a couple of days before the attack. Apparently, he was very angry with the girl and decided to confront her in this way. Although her innocence in the situation seemed clear, the sequence of events unfolded as follows. Tragic conclusion. On the morning of October 25th, Lilie went to university and then to her job in the afternoon. At the same time, her ex-boyfriend rented a silver Lexus and drove to the school. Since he had no classes, he didn't enter the building but waited in the car instead. After all the students had left the building, the perpetrator walked to the gym. To avoid carrying the hammer openly, he hid it under his jacket. Once at the scene, Paul watched Lilie's movements. After finishing her training, she decided to freshen up and headed to the shower. Seizing the moment when she was most vulnerable, the perpetrator followed her. An argument ensued, during which Thijssen attacked her and struck her head. Pathologists confirmed that her death was instantaneous. She did not suffer. After waiting an hour, the young man collected the girl's personal belongings in a backpack and left the building. Outside, he got into the car and drove to Diamond Bay, where he disposed of the weapon in the garbage container. Surveillance cameras recorded him at the reserve at 8:47 p.m. The last known location of Paul, tracked by investigators, was the Gap, a cliff at South Head in Vaucluse, an eastern suburb of Sydney. This spot is known for several reasons. It's not only popular with tourists, but also notorious for numerous suicides. Around 10 p.m., using Lilie's phone, Paul sent a message to Mr. James, likely to lead to the discovery of the girl's body. Perhaps he regretted what had happened and hoped she could be helped, or he was simply informing her parents about their daughter's location. They were clearly worried, as indicated by dozens of calls made to the phone. An hour later, the young man made a brief emergency call, but changed his mind and hung up. After that, he made a decision he had been contemplating for a long time. He stepped into the abyss and ended his life. Final clues. Upon arriving at the cliff, police did not find the young man, but they did discover the personal belongings of the former lovers. A rented car was found parked nearby. Everything indicated that the young man was no longer alive. He might have been unable to cope with his guilt, or unwilling to face the consequences of his actions. In any case, the first priority was to locate his body. On October 26th at 9 a.m., police helicopters and boats arrived at Vaucluse. The entire coastline was patrolled, and the area around the cliff at Diamond Bay was cordoned off. However, the first day of searching yielded no results. By chance, the young man's body was washed onto the rocks of the reserve the following day. After an autopsy and examination, Paul Thijssen was officially declared responsible for Lilie James's demise. However, it was impossible to hold him accountable, and the criminal case was closed. His body was later given to his parents, who decided not to repatriate him to the Netherlands, but to cremate him and scatter his ashes in Sydney. Farewell. Lilie's funeral took place on November 17, 2023, at her former school in Hurstville. About 500 people came to say goodbye to a beloved relative, friend, and coach. At that moment, grief united everyone. The school administration arranged a live broadcast of the ceremony. Notably, the girl's family asked attendees not to wear dark clothes, but instead to dress in bright colors, as they believed Lilie would have wanted. She was lively, energetic, creative, and unique, so a somber outfit would hardly have suited her. Many warm and sincere words were spoken about her. In response, the James family thanked everyone who had been with them during those difficult days for their support and help. At the entrance to the building, students and colleagues created a makeshift memorial in honor of their favorite. Flowers and farewell letters were placed next to it. As a tribute and respect, the school's website published a video of Lilie performing a monologue from Macbeth. Conclusions. After all the circumstances of the innocent girl's death were established, the school management sent another email to the students' parents. It apologized to everyone affected by the tragedy. The principal assured that the crime was completely unexpected and would not happen again. Understandably, many were concerned that a place where children should feel safe had become the epicenter of a brutal act. The administration urged everyone to see this as an isolated incident and to continue their education with renewed vigor. Later, a meeting was arranged with renowned forensic psychologist Tim Watson-Monroe, who has years of experience in analyzing the minds of both criminals and victims. He was asked to speak about what happened and to analyze Paul Thiessen's behavior. The expert assured that Paul's actions were typical of individuals with inflated self-esteem who cannot accept rejection. He believed Paul committed the act not in a burst of emotion, but deliberately and coldly. He did what he wanted and showed no remorse. When asked why the young man ended his life, Mr. Watson-Monroe stated that the perpetrator wanted to avoid responsibility and shame. Overall, he described Paul as a narcissistic individual with psychopathic tendencies. He also noted that some likened the event to the finale of Shakespeare's famous tragedy, Romeo and Juliet. However, the story of Lilie and Paul is distinct from that of the main characters in the play and creates a completely new narrative. Love has no room for pride and lies, much less deceit and betrayal. Sadly, Paul failed to understand this and to appreciate the person who was by his side. By prioritizing his bruised ego, he permanently erased the life of a girl who brought light. At the same time, he caused enduring suffering not only for Lilie's parents, but also for his own loved ones. Unfortunately, for the nurturing, care, and attention he received, he repaid them with bitter regret. The dark mystery of the disappearance is solved 14 years later. Investigating certain crimes can take years or even decades due to a lack of evidence or witnesses. Sometimes investigations are intentionally misled to create confusion or send investigators down the wrong path. Many such cases eventually end up on the shelves of archives as unresolved. However, crimes involving life-ending actions and abuses of various degrees of severity generally have no statute of limitations, and investigations can be reopened at any time when new information surfaces. Cases related to the disappearance of individuals, particularly minors, are often solved on hot tracks. It is believed that the first 3 days are critical when there is a high likelihood of finding the person alive. Thereafter, the chances of a favorable outcome rapidly diminish. The case of the missing German schoolgirl from Berlin, Georgina Kruger, was investigated for over 10 years and was considered one of the most mysterious in the history of German criminology. The girl disappeared during the day on her way home from school, having traveled just a few dozen meters from her home. No evidence, leads, or witnesses were found, and although the investigation was periodically reopened, there was little hope of solving the crime. However, thanks to meticulous work by undercover agents, the criminal was eventually exposed. What is known about Georgina Kruger and her family? Georgina, or simply Gina Kruger, was born on April 11, 1992, in Munich, and was the middle child of 3 in a simple family. She grew up with her older brother Tommy, who was 8 years her senior, and her younger sister Michelle, who was 2.5 years her junior. When Gina turned 11, her parents decided to separate, and her older brother, who was then 19, chose to live with their father. After the divorce, the girls were primarily raised by their mother Vesma and their grandmother on their mother's side. Both girls did well in school, were involved in music and dance, and were creative by nature. The family lived modestly, and while their father maintained contact with his ex-wife and daughters, he was more focused on supporting his elder son, whom he funded through school and supported in various ways. In June 2006, Vesna moved with her mother and daughters to Berlin, where she had been offered a well-paying job. The family settled in the Moabit district at house number 8 on Stendal Street. On September 1st, the sisters attended one of the best local schools, which, although located in a different district, was accessible by bus. Vesna was very pleased with her new job and had big plans for the future. But soon the peaceful and measured life of the family was shattered. She dreamed of becoming an actress. From childhood, Gina loved to sing and dance, engaging in these activities seriously and with full dedication. Inspired by Indian films, she dreamed of an acting career and enthusiastically participated in school theater, as well as attending acting and stage speech courses. Teachers working with young Kruger noted that she definitely possessed the necessary talents, and thus predicted her future success and fame. Moreover, the girl had a bright, expressive appearance, a slender feminine figure, and was quite tall for her age. She took meticulous care of herself, keeping up with fashion trends, striving to dress stylishly, and used decorative cosmetics skillfully and intelligently. It's worth noting that Georgina applied makeup as well as professional makeup artists, often doing makeup for her friends and neighbors back in Munich. In Berlin, during the summer holidays, she actively attended various castings, trying to break into the big screen or television. She managed to appear in crowd scenes a few times, but these were very inconspicuous episodes. However, on Friday, September 22nd, 2006, luck finally smiled at her. She auditioned for a guest role in the television series, Turkish for Beginners, and her candidacy was approved. Gina was supposed to receive a call back on Monday, September 25th, to finalize her inclusion in the cast, discuss details, and invite her to sign a contract. The new beauty in town. In her new school, the young beauty caused a real stir from the first day, capturing the attention of all the boys in her class. However, she struggled to get along with the girls as they openly envied her and saw her as a competitor. Her classmates were slow to accept her into their group and communicated with her reluctantly, although Gina was sociable, friendly, and open, avoided conflicts, and tried to interact with all the kids in the class. The teenage girl was indeed very beautiful, danced well, sang, and even received an offer from a modeling agency to try herself as a photo model. She agreed, but unfortunately, she never made it to the planned photo session in early October. Gina dreamed that one day she would make it to Hollywood or Bollywood, where she would act in movies. She imagined herself on the red carpets of prestigious film festivals, among celebrities, dreaming of fame, recognition, film awards, and was ready to work hard on herself to achieve her desires. The schoolgirl almost made it happen, when suddenly she disappeared without a trace, a few miles from home. So the schoolgirl was awaiting confirmation of her role in the TV series, and she had no doubts about it. All weekend, Georgina could think of nothing else but the upcoming call from the studio, which was set to decide her fate. She was excited and inspired, already imagining herself on set and working on her lines. On Monday, September 25th, as usual, she headed to school in the morning. She was supposed to return home by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and since the call was expected in the late afternoon, Gina asked her grandmother to answer all calls, promising not to linger anywhere. The day dragged on endlessly for Kruger. Her classmates noticed that she seemed tense, constantly checking the time, and unable to focus on her lessons. Since she hadn't told anyone about her participation in the casting, her anxious state was interpreted differently by everyone. When school ended, Georgina, having gathered her belongings, hurried to the nearest bus stop, got on bus number 27, which she rode daily, and headed home. After traveling 3 stops,
She got off at Rue Rettenover, which was a short distance from her house. However, she never made it home, vanishing somewhere halfway from the stop to her apartment. Georgina Kruger was never seen again, neither alive nor deceased. Search for the missing schoolgirl. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the grandmother, who was waiting for the granddaughters to return from school, had prepared lunch and set the table. Georgina was supposed to return first, and Michelle a bit later, since she had additional classes at the music school that day. But the older granddaughter did not show up, which was very strange because she was eagerly awaiting the call and had no plans to stay out. When Michelle arrived home at 3 o'clock, the grandmother grew anxious and started calling Gina to find out where she had vanished, but the schoolgirl's phone was turned off. Subsequent attempts to reach her also failed. The anxiety grew, and when Vesna returned from work and learned that her daughter was missing and her mobile was unreachable, she realized something serious had happened. The first thing the mother did was call the school, where she was informed that Kruger had attended all her classes and had left by bus as usual. Then the woman contacted several of her daughter's friends, hoping that the girls had simply got caught up talking or had stopped at the cafe on their way home, but they said that Georgina was in a hurry and had headed straight home. The concerned women then went to the police station and reported the disappearance of the 14-year-old girl. However, the law enforcement initially took a skeptical view, suspecting that the schoolgirl might have gone on a date, visited someone among friends, or had an argument with a classmate and was sulking alone somewhere in a park. After exhausting all possible scenarios and verifying that the teenager was nowhere to be found in any of the anticipated locations, detectives began checking reports of accidents and calling hospitals, assuming that the girl might have encountered trouble, suffered an injury, or been harmed on her way home from school. But Gina had not been admitted to any hospital either. As the night approached, extensive searches and witness interviews began. It turned out that the girl was last seen at the bus stop when she exited the bus and turned onto the street leading to her home. The schoolgirl was dressed in blue jeans with wear marks, a light blue t-shirt, a denim jacket, and gray sneakers. She carried a pink sports bag with a long, wide strap, which contained her notebooks, textbooks, and her mobile phone. Investigators were able to track the girl's movements through her device's signal. She indeed spent the entire day at school, then boarded the bus and got off at her stop. But approximately halfway to her home, the signal suddenly disappeared and never reappeared. The search began on Stendhal Street, where the Kruger family lived. A search team with dogs trained to detect the scent of living or deceased humans was dispatched there. At that point, there was still hope of finding the teenage girl alive and unharmed. Vanished into thin air. Law enforcement checked every home, interviewed all residents and potential witnesses, inspected attics and basements, spoke with workers at local stores and cafes, but no one had seen Georgina, and even dogs could not pick up her trail. By the next morning, flyers with the schoolgirl's photos and requests for any information about her had been posted all over the city. Dozens of calls came into the police station reporting sightings of a similar-looking girl in different parts of the city, but unfortunately, all leads turned out to be false. Concurrently, investigators began to follow up on all previously convicted local residents, as well as those who had been released on bail. Special attention was given to criminals and those who had shown an unhealthy interest in minors. However, all these efforts yielded no results. The schoolgirl seemed to have vanished into thin air, not making it home. No traces or personal belongings were found, as if she had never existed at all. False lead. After several months of fruitless searching, the investigation was suspended as there were no leads, not a single clue, and no idea which direction to pursue. However, about a year after Georgina's disappearance, an anonymous call came into the police station, with the unknown caller claiming that the girl's body rested at the bottom of a nearby lake. Authorities were unable to identify the caller, but they clung to this piece of information and decided to investigate it. For several weeks, highly skilled divers combed the lake bed using advanced equipment. It can be said with certainty that they examined virtually every inch, but found no trace of Kruger. The lead turned out to be false, but it nevertheless rekindled public interest in the case. The media actively discussed and wrote about the missing girl again, so it was decided to conduct another search operation. The police re-interviewed neighbors and brought in search dogs, although it was clear that this would likely yield no results. The dogs had been unable to pick up the girl's scent on the day of her disappearance, so there was little hope for success after a whole year. Investigators were confident that the schoolgirl was no longer alive, but the Kruger family members refused to believe this. Vesna concocted a legend for herself, according to which her daughter had run away to India and was now starring in Bollywood films, dancing and singing as she had always dreamed. The woman consoled herself with these thoughts and continued to live for the sake of her younger daughter. The monster next door. Search efforts periodically resumed, and in 2016, nearly a decade after a girl's disappearance, a resident of Stendhal Street contacted the police to complain about a neighbor who was actively inviting underage girls over to his place. This neighbor turned out to be a 35-year-old immigrant from Turkey named Ali K. He was legally married, raising 3 children, and tried to appear as an exemplary family man to those around him, but in reality, he was not. Upon closer inspection of Ali, and after studying his personality, the police were horrified, as 4 years prior, he had already been under investigation. At that time, he deceitfully lured a local schoolgirl, promising to sell her a trendy smartphone at a symbolic price. He took the girl to his storeroom, located in the basement of the apartment building, struck her on the head, and coerced her into intimate closeness. Afterward, he made the teenager swear she wouldn't tell anyone about what happened, then gave her a paper napkin to wipe her tears, and helped her tidy up before leaving.
The girl promised to remain silent just to escape from the clutches of the monster, but as soon as she was free, she immediately told her parents about the incident, and together they went to the police to report the violent actions. The schoolgirl detailed the man's storeroom in the basement, noting that it looked more like a maniac's den. Ali was arrested the same day, but he vehemently denied his guilt and shared his own version of the events. According to him, he was indeed selling the gadget, and the girl herself expressed a desire to buy it. As the smartphone was in his basement storeroom, they went down together, and when the guest examined the device, she said that she had always dreamed of such a gadget, but since she didn't have the money, she was ready to pay in another way. Following this, according to Ali, the girl began kissing him and started undressing, and he, trying to reason with her, pushed her away forcefully, causing her to fall and hit her head. This explained the injury and bruises on her body, but the fact of intimate closeness could not be proven as the man had used a contraceptive, which he later disposed of. Ali's wife, Melek, fully supported her husband and also began accusing the girl of indecent behavior and attempts to seduce her husband. Ultimately, the man only received a suspended sentence for causing moderate bodily harm. Nonetheless, now as the police took up the investigation of the disappearance of Kruger again, they decided to check him thoroughly once more. Ali K did not have a permanent job and got by on odd jobs, mainly living on benefits. He loved gambling and often incurred debts, was a regular visitor to the Turkish coffee shop on the ground floor of his building, where he made acquaintances with different people who treated him to food and drinks. The man carefully maintained his appearance, desperately trying to look younger than his years. He wore fashionable clothes, sometimes even spending children's benefits on them. But the main oddity about this man was his attraction to girls. He continually tried to meet teenagers, ask them inappropriate questions, and also offered strange and illegal things, for instance, help with buying alcohol or cigarettes. Ali most resembled the role of Georgina's abductor, but the police had nothing against him in this case. New investigation. Nevertheless, the Kruger case was reopened, and a new investigation was initiated due to the emergence of a new suspect. Ali K was brought to the station and questioned, but he naturally denied any involvement in the decade-old case. His storage room in the basement was inspected, but no traces of the missing schoolgirl were found. Detectives noted that this space indeed seemed more like a meeting place than a storage area. It turned out that 10 years ago, he had been questioned along with other neighbors, and his basement had been inspected. But specifically, Ali's storage room had not been checked because, firstly, there was no reason to, and secondly, according to residents, the door always had a lock, so only the owner could access it. Ali himself had been an active participant in the search operation at that time and was one of its most engaged members. Despite the fact that the police had nothing concrete to charge K with, they decided to keep him under surveillance to learn as much as possible about him. Unofficial monitoring was organized, and all his phone calls were intercepted. Soon, this provided initial results, and detectives discovered that the man had significant debts unknown to his wife. He had lost about 10,000 euros in poker and had no idea how to get out of this predicament. The investigation decided to focus on this aspect. Undercover agents. The decision was made to introduce an undercover agent into the suspect's close circle, who was expected to gain his trust, extract the necessary information, and secure an on-record confession. However, everything had to be done slowly and carefully so the suspect wouldn't become suspicious and would feel secure. For this purpose, a special agent codenamed Hakan was prepared and sent in, posing as a successful businessman who had recently moved to the Moabit area to open a car service station. A couple of times he visited the cafe in Ali's building, where he loudly discussed business plans and details with a partner. As they left, the partner mentioned that they needed to find a manager soon, noting that it was a well-paying position and it was important to choose wisely.
After these words, the second man left, and Hakan stayed to finish his coffee, when suddenly Ali approached and sat at his table. He took the bait and immediately offered himself for the manager position. A conversation ensued, which quickly turned into a casual chat, and the businessman noted that Ali might fit the role, then mentioned the salary. Ali's eyes lit up at the figure. He began dreaming of paying off his debts and buying the sports car he had always wanted. The men exchanged phone numbers, and from that day on, they began to communicate regularly, and their relationship quickly grew into a friendship. Hakan even started taking Ali on business trips to other cities, aiming to get closer to him and gain his trust. But this friendship had the opposite effect, as the suspect strived to appear as the best version of himself to his prospective employer. He boasted of his achievements, even the most minor ones, and preferred to keep silent about any wrongful acts. Several months later, realizing that the case was not progressing, the investigation decided to introduce another agent, this time a woman, who would play Hakan's girlfriend. This introduced Susan into the story, whose goal was to befriend Ali's wife, Melek, and try to uncover any secrets the husband might be keeping. It only took a few meetings for them to get along, after which all four started socializing as families. Melek was a sociable woman, but regarded her husband as nearly a saint. For years she had turned a blind eye to his infidelities, did not believe the schoolgirl who accused him of violence, and was convinced that her husband was a very good person, just unlucky with jobs. But now everything would change. Soon, Susan realized that Ali's wife wasn't just covering for him. She truly believed that he was simply incapable of harming anyone. The agents even decided to use a trick by spreading a rumor that there was progress in the Kruger case and an unnamed source had indicated where to find her body. Hakan left a newspaper with this article in his car, which Ali had started borrowing occasionally. Several cameras and recording devices were also installed in this car. When the suspect and his wife got into the car, she soon noticed the newspaper left behind, quickly skimmed the article, showed a bit of surprise that the case was still being investigated, and then indifferently put the paper aside. It became clear that Melek knew nothing about this. Otherwise, she would have inadvertently revealed herself. Good cop, bad cop. 6 months later, the investigation finally concluded that their plan had failed. The Kay family had become friends with the agents, even trusting them to look after their children, but no confessions were forthcoming. Ali strived to appear honest and upright, and his wife was simply unaware of the crime her husband had committed. Moreover, maintaining their cover was becoming increasingly expensive. They even had to lease a space for the supposed auto repair shop and signed a sham employment contract with the man to avoid raising his suspicions. The investigation then took a desperate last step by introducing another agent who would play a villainous role. According to the backstory, his name was Kor. He was Hakan's cousin, had a criminal record, and was running some underground business. It was hoped that Ali, meeting a kindred spirit, would open up and confess his sins. The men quickly bonded over their shared interests. Kor treated his new friend to drinks, and together they visited various clubs and houses of ill repute. The new friend confessed that he made money through not entirely legal means, and thus wanted to spend it indulgently, with Ali willingly helping him in this. Simultaneously, Kor constantly complained about his girlfriend, with whom he supposedly could not break up, because she was blackmailing him and threatening to report his illegal business to the police. According to him, she constantly demanded money, and her appetites were growing. One day, while having drinks with his friend, Kaur declared that he intended to rid himself of the bothersome blackmailing girlfriend in a radical way and was willing to pay a sum of 100,000 euros to anyone who would do the dirty work. Ali perked up at this and offered to take on the task himself. His friend agreed, but suggested they discuss the details in a secluded place when sober. Monstrous confession.
In November 2017, sitting in the agent's car, the men discussed the plan to eliminate his nuisance girlfriend. At one point, Kaur doubted whether Ali was capable of taking a life. In response, Ali revealed something he claimed no one else knew. He confessed that more than 11 years ago, he had taken a life of someone with his bare hands. Ali said that in 2006, a stunning young girl had moved onto his street, who completely captivated him. She passed by his house twice a day on her way to and from school, so he had memorized her schedule and would step out to greet her and pay compliments. Despite her young age, he described her as hot, and he burned with desire for her. One warm September day, when the girl was returning from school and the street was unusually quiet and deserted, Ali saw his chance. He asked a neighbor girl to help him move some items from his storage area, and she kindly agreed, not sensing any danger. Once they were in the basement, he locked the door and tried to kiss the schoolgirl, who struggled and screamed. He then knocked her unconscious with a blow to the head and took advantage of her. After the incident, afraid she might report him to the police, he decided not to let her go. He grabbed her throat with his hands and squeezed as hard as he could. Ali described the process in detail, explaining how he felt the crunch and sensed the pulse in her neck fade away. The girl's body lay in the basement for several days, so if the search team had looked into his storage area, they would have immediately uncovered the perpetrator. But no one suspected anything, and once the commotion had died down, he wrapped the body in an old rug and disposed of it in a garbage bin, which went directly to the landfill. Ali's confessions were recorded on a camera installed in Kaur's car, and by the evening of that same day, he was taken into custody. Unfortunately, the girl's remains were never found, as the waste of a landfill was regularly incinerated, and her body was essentially cremated. The trial and verdict. The hearings in this case lasted another 2.5 years before a final verdict was delivered to the criminal. He adamantly denied any wrongdoing, claiming that he had fabricated the entire story to gain Kaur's trust. But in reality, he planned to rescue his girlfriend by turning in his friend to the police as soon as he received the money. No other evidence was found besides the criminal's own confession. However, his detailed and vivid account was enough to convince the jury of this man's guilt. In March 2020, nearly 14 years after Georgina's disappearance, Ali K. was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of ever being released. His wife, Melek, never believed in her husband's guilt, convinced that he had implicated himself while pursuing a noble cause. Parents can be very intrusive, arrogant, and demanding in their demands. Sometimes it brings some benefit, and sometimes it does not. There are times when this demanding is even dangerous. Brett Ryan was in just such a situation. He grew up in a prosperous and large Canadian family where his parents, Bill and Susan, had 4 sons. It might seem that having so many children, and especially boys, is hard and exhausting parenting labor. But it wasn't for everyone. Their parents tried to teach the younger Ryans by example. Their father, in addition to his prestigious job at the Toronto Star daily newspaper, had many hobbies, such as sports, yoga, and psychology. And as for Susan, she was very hardworking, and the whole family home rested on her shoulders. She not only gave her time to her husband and children, but also kept a huge house in a prestigious area of Toronto in perfect condition, and all this, without the help of gardeners and craftsmen. Neighbors passing by the family home, for a while lingered to admire the huge and blooming garden through the fence. It could not be said that Brett was the family favorite. No, Suzanne loved everyone equally, but from the outside it might have seemed that it was Brett who was scolded least of all for obedience. The thing was, he could always get out of any situation. Even when all the evidence pointed to his involvement, he found a way to prove that he was only partially involved. And amazingly, that ability helped him have a lot of friends. Yeah, Brett was pretty damn popular at school. Everyone wanted to be friends with him, or at least be able to say hello by the hand. Just like his older brothers, Brett went to university after high school. Brett always wanted to be better than his brothers, so he took out an ad in the local newspaper offering Toronto residents a service to paint houses and fences. At first things were going really well. The young man had his first money. Susan was even proud of her son and always held him up as an example to others. But it's one thing when this money is a part-time job, and quite another when you drop out of university to spend all your free time breathing in the smell of paint and not having any education. Yes, after a while, Brett dropped out of university. While for the first couple of years Brett felt confident in front of his older brothers after a while, when Christopher and Leland graduated and found jobs in their specialties, Brett's authority began to fade. Christopher worked for the City of Toronto Transit Commission, and Leland became the family artist and designer. After their studies, they moved out of their parents' home, and Brett, to avoid spending part of his earnings on rent, stayed with his father, mother, and younger brother, who attended a school for gifted children. With each passing year, Brett became more and more desperate. Because of his debts and inability to pay them off, he developed depression. By 2007, when Brett was already 26 years old, his debt had passed $60,000. Brett was considered a pretty smart guy, but he didn't know how to use his mind. At the same time, he did not show how bad he was. He always smiled, helped everyone, was a participant of volunteer movements. No one could believe how big the black hole in his soul was. Finally came that fateful moment when nothing could be done, at least not legally. On October 28, 2007, Brett had no orders for house painting or any other work around the house. Orders are always extremely scarce in the fall. Everyone who wanted to had already painted their houses in the spring or summer. Winter was approaching, from which you should not expect any big earnings. There was no time to wait for anything. Brett put on all the old clothes he had in his closet, a hat, a long sweater he'd gotten from his older brother, a scarf his mother had knitted. The scarf was comically long. Brett hadn't even worn it before, but finally the scarf came in handy. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank that was on the outskirts of his neighborhood. He was clutching some thick folder and limped playfully on his right foot. Brett waited his turn at the bank, and when he was finally summoned by an employee, he went up to her and told her in a quiet voice that he had a gun with him. He also told her to take all the money out of the bank's cash register and give it to him. Otherwise, he would shoot here, and the first person he would kill would be her. The girl with trembling hands handed him all the cash she had in the cash register, and Brett quietly walked out of the building so as not to attract the attention of the guards, and when he was on the street, he ran away. He counted the money he had stolen. It wasn't very much, a little over $1,000. To pay off his debts, he would have to rob about 60 banks. Sounds fantastic, but there was no other way out. For the first few days, the novice robber feared that the police would somehow still be able to get to him, so he did not appear at home. He told his mother that he had an order in the neighboring town, and he himself spent the night in the car. Periodically, Brett crept up to his house to see if there was a police car in the bushes. No, it was quiet. No one was looking for him. That's good. So he's headed in the right direction. The first robbery was followed by a second, third, fourth. Brett changed clothes each time. He didn't wear his old clothes anymore. He bought them secondhand, or even found them in the trash. After the crime, he burned the used clothes. Brett also purchased a beard from a store that sold outfits for costume parties. The bank employees he threatened always noticed his beard, and later testified that the attacker was a bearded man. Toronto newspapers began publishing a number of articles about the bearded robber. But the bearded robber never made a fortune in robberies. The maximum amount that could be stolen did not exceed $3,000. Finally, Brett had a misfire. The police spotted his car on the surveillance cameras and followed him all the way home. By that time, they still had no direct evidence of his guilt. It was decided to just follow the suspect. It was as if Brett sensed the outside surveillance and did not go on a robbery spree for the next 15 days, although before that, the intervals between crimes were 3 or 4 days. The cops thought they were on the wrong trail and wasting their time suspecting an innocent guy, but finally, luck smiled on them. Brett left the house, got into a car, and later got out of the car not far from the bank, wearing a different, strange outfit. He went into the branch, stayed there for a while, but at the exit, he was met by the police to finally handcuff him and announce that the much-discussed bearded robber had finally been caught. Brett was under investigation for 7 months. He was charged with robbery with a firearm. Interestingly, despite having a gun permit, the bearded robber always came to the bank empty-handed. He didn't even have a kitchen knife with him. In total, he was charged with 19 counts and was sent to prison. From there, Brett, just like his family, filed multiple appeals. This yielded results. Only 8 of the 19 counts were upheld. But Brett didn't stop there. As soon as he had the opportunity to apply for parole, he took it. In his petition, Brett asked to take into account the fact that he went to these crimes being in a severe depression, caused by 2 failed relationships, as well as a large amount of debt. At the same time, he once again noted that he went to the crimes without weapons, absolutely not planning to harm anyone. His remarks were accepted, but in order to get out of prison early, he had to undergo a session with a psychologist. The sessions had a positive effect on Brett. All the time he was behind bars, he did not communicate with his family, and now he himself has made a step towards getting closer and restoring relations with his family. The positive changes were noticed by the commissioners, so on November 24, 2010, Brett was released. This freedom, for which the young man fought so zealously, turned out to be very bitter and even harder than it was before. Who was Brett before? A painter with a heavy burden on his soul. What was he now? Brett the bank robber, Brett the ex-con. With such a tainted background, he was never hired by any company, and those who hired him for house painting services, as soon as they recognized him as the bearded robber, refused his services. Also the neighbors, yes, the same ones who used to praise Susan's garden and visit, now began to spread various unpleasant rumors. The whole Ryan family hastily sold the house and moved to Scarborough. Susan started growing her new garden again, and Brett did get a job with a trading company, but his pay was not high. His parents were also helping him with money to rebuild his university education. Brett still visited a psychologist, and each time the specialist advised him the same thing: don't break the connection with your family. The psychologist's advice really worked. Despite this, Brett's financial well-being left much to be desired. In September 2011, the first happy accident in his life happened. He met Kristen Baxter. Kristen was just a fantastic girl. She had her own apartment, the windows of which overlooked the sea, thanks to which the young couple opened a beautiful landscape. She was engaged in sports, which allowed her to keep her body in shape. And most importantly, she did not care about Brett's past. They also traveled periodically as a couple, and had even been to Australia. Brett's father and mother, watching his relationship with the girl develop, were very happy. In addition, they were sure that their son will finally take his head, and Kristen will push him in every possible way to develop and finally take his place in society. Brett felt that life was starting to get better, but there was an unfortunate event that was out of his control and that disrupted the building of a new phase. Brett's father died. For him, it was a real shock. His depressive state began to return, because of which Brett began to visit a psychologist more often. He also had to spend a lot of time with his mother and help her with money, which he already had a little. A long relationship with Kristen had to be developed. Young people were not teenagers, which is enough just to meet and spend free time together. Being madly in love with this enchanting blonde, Brett decided to take a serious step. He had some savings, plus he talked to his mother and said that he wanted to build a family with Kristen. And to do this, he needed to make her an offer that Kristen could not refuse him and remember this day for the rest of her life. Susan realized what her son was getting at and gave him money to buy a ring. It should be noted that the couple had discussed their future before that. And no, Kristen didn't need some expensive gift or something like that. It was enough for her to get a proposal from Brett as a confirmation of his serious intentions. But he still decided to splurge and bought a gold ring with a huge diamond for his beloved. Kristen, of course, told him yes. Then, as is usually the case, the young people began planning their wedding. Brett agreed with all of Kristen's decisions and nodded approvingly. but he was horrified at how expensive it was and how much he needed to think about his job. He found an engineering job opening for a large technology company on the internet, put together a resume, and responded to it. He even had a successful interview and was accepted. Brett was happy at the time. He immediately excited his fiancée and his mother with this news, from whom he again asked for money to buy himself an expensive suit to wear to work. Once again, his mother did not refuse her son. When the suit was already bought, Brett received a call from the company saying that they had to refuse him because the security service had found out about his criminal past. For Brett, it was like thunder that broke over him. His mood began to plummet immediately, and he finally gave up. Why waste time on this endless series of interviews, waiting for answers, if in the end, no one wants to hire a criminal, even if corrected? And most importantly, why waste time studying? Brett decided that it would be better to spend the money his mother and older brothers gave him for his university studies on his wedding to Kristen, and so he did. Brett was back in the situation he had recently gotten out of. He didn't tell his family that he had dropped out of university, and most importantly, he didn't tell his counselor. He also didn't tell anyone that he had been turned down for an engineering job. He put on a shirt, tie, suit, and went to paint houses, changing into a change of clothes right on the way, and told his relatives that he was working in an office. In addition, in his social networks, Brett constantly posted various photos from the office, or from some business event, of course, previously downloaded from the internet. And also being near his loved ones, he often pretended as if his phone was ringing and he urgently needed to solve some work issues. He was very skillful at making dust in his eyes, and no one would have thought that Brett was actually a common painter. In September 2016, after a 5-year relationship with Kristen, Brett planned to have a wedding. He even agreed to rent an expensive restaurant where it was necessary to pay $100 for each guest. The whole Ryan family was very happy because Brett finally took himself in hand, has a prestigious job, lives in a fancy apartment, and he has a stunning bride. But they had no idea that Brett's lies had gone too far and there was no way to get out of it unscathed. By then, the wedding was only a month away and the event required an investment. Our hero again and again borrowed money from his mother, and when he realized that she was no longer able to help him, he literally demanded that she change her job to a better paying one. Also, he planned a bachelor party in August, to which he invited all his friends and brothers. As the fuse of this bombshell began to burn out, Brett still decided to tell his counselor about everything. Brett had been lying to his family for a year about working for a technology company as an engineer. The psychologist was saddened that the guy he'd been leading for so long had gotten off the right track again and said that Brett just needed to come clean to his mother. Brett thought about it for a long time, procrastinated, but eventually did so. His mother was insanely upset because she had spent so long telling everyone what a wonderful son she had. She also demanded that Brett tell Kristen everything because if he kept quiet, she would. She also warned her son that his brothers were already aware of the situation and they were on her side. Brett couldn't do that. After all, he'd had such a hard time telling his mother the truth, and he couldn't tell Kristen about his lies. Yes, he knew that there was less than a month until the wedding, which wouldn't happen because of his lying, and indeed, it would have been better for Kristen to know everything in advance, but he still kept quiet. It wasn't clear what Brett was counting on, and he also couldn't help thinking that his mother would really tell his fiancée everything, and then the scandal would be unavoidable. Brett flinched every time Kristen's phone rang, and even stopped breathing until he realized that it wasn't his mother calling, but another friend of his future wife, asking her about her wedding plans and giving her advice. Finally, he figured out how to silence his mother permanently. When Brett was convicted of robbery, he was forbidden to use firearms, so the boy decided that the best way to carry out his plan was to use a crossbow. And besides, it's a pretty silent murder weapon. One of his late father's hobbies was crossbow shooting in the garden at targets. He taught Brett how to shoot too. Yes, he was good at target shooting, except that it was unlikely his late father thought his son would use that skill in such a way. Brett bought the crossbow and arrows at a sporting goods store and hid it behind the construction debris that lay in Susan's garage. At home, he arranged what he thought was an ingenious alibi invention. He tied a spoon to a fan and set the fan itself on a timer. When the timer went off, the fan turned on, and the spoon moved across the computer keyboard, sending pre-prepared comments to YouTube. From the outside, it must have looked like Brett had spent all day at home, watching videos and commenting on them. On the morning of August 25th, Brett dressed up in strange clothes that hid his face, left the house through the back door to avoid the security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house to get rid of anyone who might disrupt his and Kristen's well-being once and for all. Susan was very surprised at her son's unexpected arrival. She had not been feeling well that day, but Brett, despite his mother's condition, once again began to persuade her and even demand not to tell his future wife anything. The mother categorically refused him. Then he began to get angry, and Susan, sensing something wrong, seeing her son's mad eyes, warned him that she had already called Christopher and he was on his way to them. Brett was going crazy. He ran to the garage, got a crossbow, but his anger and adrenaline overflowed him with such force that he couldn't even make a shot. He just bludgeoned his mother with the butt of the gun, and finally, to be sure that she was finally dead, he tightened the rope around her neck. After throwing plastic bags over the body, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows and hid in the bushes waiting for his brother to arrive. After a while, Christopher arrived, started calling for his mother or his brother, but in response was shot in the neck from behind, which caused him to die within a few minutes. The next victim was the youngest brother, Alexander. As it turns out, Susan managed to call him too. He was also shot in the neck, but either the arrow did not go deep or did not hit vital arteries, so Alexander did not die immediately, but began to scream and call for help. All this time, Leland was in the house, sleeping in his room on the second floor, and had no idea of the carnage that was going on in the garage and in the garden, and most importantly that it was his own brother who was committing the crime. His sleep was disturbed by a scream, and coming downstairs, Leland saw Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett, and as soon as Leland got the upper hand and managed to push his brother aside, he immediately ran to the neighbors and called the police. Brett stayed in the house. He had nowhere to run. He realized that this was the moment he had completely screwed up his life. There was nothing to do. He took out his phone and wrote Kristen a letter asking her to forgive him. The police arrived at the crime scene and saw a bloody Brett, who was sitting next to his equally bloody but still alive brother Alexander, who would die later in the hospital. Brett himself asked the policeman to handcuff him and take him to the station, where he would confess to everything. He also said that his mother's body was hidden under packages in the garage, but it was impossible to help her. At the police station, and later at the trial, Brett admitted that he did not want to kill Susan. His plan was only to scare her. Christopher and Alexander, on the other hand, he did plan to kill that day, but as witnesses, and if they hadn't arrived, they would still be alive. Just like almost 10 years ago, he tried to justify everything with his depressive state, but it did not soften his sentence. And despite the fact that the judge took into account the fact that Brett confessed to everything himself and did not cause the investigation any trouble, the young man received 3 life sentences, 1 for each murder, with the right to get parole in 2041. As for Leland, he's not speaking to reporters, but he's known throughout Toronto as the sole survivor of that carnage.